The number was so specific it almost felt suspicious. Not rich. Not wildly successful. Not private jet money. Just safe. $186,000 a year. That was the income Americans said, on average, they would need to feel financially secure. Safe. Comfortable. Able to breathe. Not guessing every month. Not quietly flinching every time the phone buzzed with a bank notification. $186,000. Maya saw that number on her phone while sitting in the parking lot outside a grocery store, hands still on the steering wheel, engine off, bags in the back seat warming in the June heat. She read it twice, then once more, like maybe she had misread a digit. She made 84. Her husband, Daniel, made just over 60. Together on paper, they were not doing terribly. Not by the standards they grew up with. They had a 3-bedroom house in North Carolina, 2 aging cars, decent credit, a daughter who needed braces, and a son who had recently started saying the word college like it was not a dream but a plan. Their combined income was just under $150,000. 10 years earlier, that number would have sounded enormous to both of them. Now she was sitting in a grocery store parking lot staring at a survey telling her that even people making more than they did still didn't feel safe until they reached $186,000 a year. And the strange part was not that the number seemed high. The strange part was that it made emotional sense immediately. Not because Maya wanted a bigger life. Because she wanted a less fragile one. That is the real story hiding inside a number like this. People hear it and assume greed. Inflation of expectations. Social media poison. Lifestyle creep. The usual lecture. But when Americans say they need $186,000 a year to feel secure, they are not necessarily describing luxury. A lot of them are describing the price of not being scared. Maya knew exactly what that meant. Fear in her life did not look dramatic. It looked administrative. It looked like the dental bill that arrived 2 weeks before the car needed brakes. It looked like the air conditioner making a noise in July. It looked like her son's field trip form sitting on the counter for 2 days because payday was Friday. It looked like pretending not to notice how often Daniel had started saying, "Let's just wait till next month." They were not poor. That was part of the confusion. They went out to dinner sometimes. The children had birthday parties. The refrigerator was full. There were towels in the linen closet, gas in the tank, and enough normalcy from the street that nobody would think of them as struggling. But safety is not the same thing as appearances. Safety is not whether the bills get paid this month. Safety is whether 6 bad months would change who you are. A few states away, in a condo tower outside Chicago, a man named Victor read the same number over coffee and laughed out loud. 186,000? He made 230. His wife made another 90. Together they brought in more than $300,000 a year, and if anyone had asked him whether that should be enough to feel secure, he would have said yes without hesitation. If anyone had asked him whether he actually felt secure, he would have paused too long. Victor was 48, a director at a healthcare company, well-spoken, competent, exhausting to be around after his 3rd bourbon because every conversation with him eventually turned into a disguised stress report. Mortgage. Taxes. Private school. His mother's care. His younger daughter's anxiety treatment. His oldest son's tuition. A neighborhood where everyone seemed to spend like confidence was a civic duty. When he saw that $186,000 figure, his first reaction was not disbelief. It was resentment. Because he had crossed it. And the fear had not stopped. That is where the number becomes more interesting. Not as a target. As a mirror. Americans do not just want more money because things cost more. They want more money because the definition of secure has changed under their feet. Security used to mean food in the house, debt under control, maybe a pension, maybe a paid-off home if you were lucky, and enough predictability to imagine the future without tightening your jaw. Now security means being able to survive systems that seem professionally designed to remain unstable. Healthcare that can reorganize an entire year. Housing that punishes hesitation. Childcare that can erase a raise. College costs that make responsible parents feel stupid. Retirement that no longer arrives automatically with age or loyalty. A labor market where one layoff can make a formerly solid person feel suddenly negotiable. So when people name a number, they are not just naming a salary. They are naming the income they think might finally overpower uncertainty. That is why the number is emotional before it is mathematical. Months after Maya first saw it, she mentioned it at a family barbecue. Her brother-in-law, Chris, was holding a paper plate with a burger in one hand and a beer in the other. He sold commercial roofing and made very good money in certain years, terrible money in others, and had the confident swagger of someone who did not believe in slow walking across a room. 186? he said. Honestly, that sounds low. Everyone laughed. But nobody laughed because he sounded ridiculous. They laughed because everybody at that table had quietly built their own version of the number already. Maya's sister, who worked in HR, said she'd probably need around 200,000 to feel truly safe. Her mother, who had retired from a county office job and lived mostly on social security and discipline, shook her head and said young people had no idea how expensive peace had become. Chris said it depended where you lived. Maya said, "No, I think it depends how afraid you are." That ended the conversation for a moment. Because she had said the quiet part out loud. There was a time when Americans used income as a way to measure what they could buy. Now many of them use it to measure what they can stop worrying about. That's a different calculation. Take Jordan, 29, renting in Phoenix, making $92,000 in software sales. 5 years ago, his parents would have called that an incredible start. Jordan calls it decent and says things like, "I'm not really behind, but I'm not ahead either." He is not careless. He maxes a Roth some years. He has a 6-month emergency fund on paper, although it has a strange habit of turning into a 3-month emergency fund every time life gets interesting. He is single, ambitious, gym-disciplined, and always one apartment tour away from talking himself into upgrading his environment. When he hears that Gen Z and millennials often think they need roughly $200,000 a year to feel secure, he doesn't react with shock. He reacts with recognition. Not because he needs a penthouse. Because every rung of adult life now seems to come with a subscription fee. Better building. Better neighborhood. Better insurance. Better dental plan. Better investments. Better flights home for Christmas because the cheap ones come with a layover that steals a whole day. Better everything. He is not chasing luxury exactly. He is chasing the feeling of being less exposed. That is what makes this whole conversation so slippery. The number keeps moving because people are trying to solve a feeling, and feelings are terrible accountants. A family making 70,000 may say they need 120. A family making 120 may say they need 186. A household making 250 may quietly believe the real number is 320. It is tempting to mock this. To say people simply expand their lifestyle to match their income. And yes, that happens. It happens all the time. The nicer car. The bigger house. The vacation that turns from occasional treat into annual expectation. The child who now needs the summer program that costs what a used car used to. But that is not the whole story. The deeper story is that once people rise into a slightly better life, they begin to understand how expensive it is to stay there. And staying there starts to feel like safety. Victor understood that part too well. One Thursday evening, he stood in the kitchen while his wife, Elena, sat at the island paying bills on her laptop. Their daughter was upstairs FaceTiming a friend. Their son was home from college for the summer and had already asked, gently but unmistakably, whether they could help with housing next year. Victor poured sparkling water into a glass and said, "You know what's insane? We make more than I ever thought we would, and I still feel like one major thing goes wrong and we're in a completely different conversation." Elena didn't look up. That's because one major thing does go wrong every year. It was such a perfect sentence that he didn't answer. That is the architecture of modern insecurity. Not constant disaster. Constant near disaster. A perpetual stream of expensive interruptions, just significant enough to prevent stability from ever feeling complete. The tax surprise. The roof leak. The prescription that is somehow not covered. The interest rate reset. The aging parent. The teenager's mental health. The market dip that arrives right when you are finally feeling responsible. This is why the number Americans name is never really about the income alone. It's about the fantasy of a buffer large enough to absorb life without converting every inconvenience into a family mood. That buffer is what people are trying to buy. Not necessarily status. Not yachts. Not diamonds. Not some cartoon version of making it. Just the right to have something go wrong without the whole emotional climate of the house changing. Maya felt that most clearly in winter. The washing machine broke the same week the school sent a reminder about spring activity fees. Daniel's hours got cut for 2 weeks after a supply issue at work. Their daughter needed a follow-up orthodontist appointment that somehow cost more than the original conversation implied. Nothing about any of this was cinematic. That was the point. Insecurity in America often does not arrive like a hurricane. It arrives like 3 ordinary Tuesdays in a row. And because it is ordinary, people internalize it. They assume the exhaustion means they are disorganized. That the tightness means they should be more disciplined. That if they were just slightly smarter, slightly more optimized, slightly more mature, they would finally feel the thing they keep calling security. But what if security isn't failing to arrive because people are irresponsible? What if it's failing to arrive because the cost of being basically okay has become psychologically incompatible with the average person's nervous system? That's what the number reveals. $186,000 sounds like a salary story. It is actually a stress story. It is the amount at which many Americans imagine the noise might finally go down.
Not disappear. Just go down.
Her mother understood this in a different way. At 71, living alone in a smaller town, she did not need $186,000. She needed predictability.
Her mortgage was gone.
Her car was old but paid off. She bought store-brand cereal without drama and knew how to stretch leftovers into something that felt intentional. When Maya asked her what number would make her feel secure, she thought for a moment and said, "For me,
I don't know.
Maybe not that much. But I came from a time when secure meant you learned how to live with less. You people are trying to earn your way out of uncertainty."
You people.
Maya laughed when she said it, but it stayed with her. Because maybe that was the shift. Older Americans often built security around lower expectations and more fixed structures. Younger Americans are trying to build security inside moving systems.
Rent moves. Rates move. Healthcare moves. Jobs move. School costs move. Even success moves.
So the number rises not only because people want more, but because the ground beneath them feels less willing to stay still. By the end of that year, Maya and Daniel still did not make $186,000. They did not suddenly transform their finances. There was no magical fourth-quarter montage where they discovered a perfect budget, cut 3 subscriptions, and entered a calmer chapter of life. What changed was smaller and, in its own way, more unsettling. They stopped treating security like a milestone and started treating it like a structure. Not a salary you hit.
A system you build.
Daniel refinanced nothing, upgraded nothing, bought nothing impressive. Instead, he started sending a boring automatic transfer into a separate account they privately called the 6 Bad Months Fund. Maya stopped mentally spending tax refunds before they arrived. They talked, for the first time without defensiveness, about whether the next raise should improve their life or protect it. That distinction changed the air in the room. Meanwhile, Victor and Elena made a different discovery. They were not lacking income. They were lacking margin. Their security problem was not low earnings. It was a life whose fixed costs had become too elegant to question. They didn't need more prestige. They needed fewer monthly obligations dressed up as success. So they began, awkwardly, to unwind a few things. Not enough for anyone outside the house to notice. Just enough for them to feel something almost unfamiliar. Slack. And slack, more than salary, may be what most Americans actually mean when they say they want to feel safe and secure.
Not constant abundance.
Slack in the system. Slack in the calendar. Slack in the checking account. Slack between a surprise and a crisis. That's why the exact income matters, and also why it doesn't. Because the number is real. It tells us something important about how expensive psychological safety has become in this country. It tells us that many Americans no longer trust modest stability to hold. It tells us that even 6 figures can feel emotionally thin. It tells us that people are exhausted enough to put a price tag on peace. But the number is also a little haunted. Because no single income by itself can guarantee the feeling people are chasing. The family earning $90,000 can feel steadier than the family earning $300. The retiree with lower expenses can feel safer than the executive with a giant burn rate. The young renter with savings and no debt can sleep better than the homeowner with status and no margin. So when Americans say they need $186,000 to feel secure, maybe the truest reading is not, "This is the amount that creates peace." Maybe it's this. This is the amount at which people hope life will finally stop feeling like it could turn on them so quickly. And that is a very different kind of sentence. Because it reveals that the real hunger underneath the number is not for luxury.
It is for relief.
Not for proof that they've made it. For evidence that one bad season will not unmake them. That is why the number feels both exact and strangely impossible. That is why people who haven't reached it are fixated on it. That is why people who have reached it sometimes still feel cheated. They were never chasing a paycheck. They were chasing the moment when money would stop feeling like a source of low-grade threat. And for millions of Americans, that moment still lives somewhere just beyond the next raise.